Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of boards, recorder of videos, and a tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DriveThruRPG review, my written and video review series. Take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at DriveThruRPG.com. With this video, I'll be reviewing the monster book Swarms of the Multiverse, designed by Splinterverse Media for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my content, consider using my affiliate links for online shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/Rogue Watson. This has nothing to do with Marvel, by the way. If you are going to name something to do with the multiverse, I feel like Marvel is going to be the first thing that's going to come to anybody's minds. But I guess it's just saying that this is maybe more Eldritch themed or Far Realm themed, and obviously not tied to any particular world because this is on DriveThruRPG and not on 5e, so you don't, or not on DM's Guild, so you don't have the you can't use the Forgotten Realm specifically or any of these specific things. But if you're going to say multiverse, I don't know. I'm going to start thinking about Marvel at least for the next whatever 10 years are going to do the whole multiverse saga for. But no, this is not a Marvel book. This is a 5e book, and it's a monster book. And you may be thinking, okay, swarms, so it's all about swarming creatures. So little tiny, insects or rats or some other little creature that can get together as a swarm stat block, which is something that exists in 5th edition. And the swarms become kind of a whole different stat block that has its own style and traits to it and kind of defining sets of rules, kind of like if you were to turn something into a zombie and then you can follow certain traits and rules to turn something into a zombie, which is in the monster manual. You can add like undead fortitude and subtract their AC and give them like poison immunity, and you essentially can zombify any monster. So what Swarms the Multiverse does is give you rules for turning any kind of creature into a swarm, and there's rules for how to turn whatever size creature into, it'd be the next size up, obviously, for a swarm, or even two sizes up. What that's going to do to its senses, any of its attributes, maybe some special attacks or things. All the rules are in here. It all seems pretty intuitive and easy to follow. It's a little more involved because swarms may have a little bit more complexity to them, but also it can be as simple as you need it to be, because a lot of creatures, if they're swarming, they may not behave any differently than if they were just a single creature. However, the creatures that are presented in this monster book, for the most part, they have a lot of special things that can happen if they get together, which is what I think this book is really quite special. And you may be thinking, okay, so we're just going to get more of these swarming creatures, but no, you're actually going to get a lot of eldritch, crazy, creepy, ghastly creatures that are not small at all. Some of them are medium sized, some of them are in large size, which means these swarm versions are huge to gargantuan. It's actually shocking to me that we went kind of really far from what I thought the theme was, which was going to be, small-ish creatures that are swarming together, and you're just going to give me a bunch of new swarm stat blocks, which is fine. That's, kind of a nice thing to have. And these first, whatever they are, 15 or so pages, a dozen or so pages, on how to make my own swarms, like even that gives me a ton of content, because now I can make anything in the monster manual into a swarm. But what this includes is over 70 new creatures. I guess there are a few more pages. There we go. About how to make swarms for different types, like environmental swarms, or I don't know, undead swarms, emotion swarms, insect swarms, all the different kind of like traits and abilities that these certain swarms would have. The actual bestiary, though, is absolutely crazy and extremely interesting, because it kind of defied my expectations going into it, which was, okay, we're going to see, these smaller creatures. Like the first one on here, the alchemic ooze, is a large ooze, which means the swarming version of it is a gargantuan swarm of oozes. And then I was like, wait a minute, what are we doing here? This is not at all what I expected. But I will say that these are really fun, interesting creatures. They all have a ton of artwork, multiple stat blocks, and yes, each one of these, this is some kind of skunk baboon the size of a bear called a karkan. Can all of them have swarming versions? That's like the big theme that ties them all together. Even though you're looking at some of these creatures going, well, how the fuck? Like, this just looks like a humanoid like zit. Like, how does this swarm? But there are rules for it swarming, and it's cool because it takes basically the designer's own rules that they just used for making swarms and then applies it to every single one of these creatures. I just wasn't expecting like kind of a, I don't use this disparagingly, but kind of a normal monster book, and then we just applying swarm concepts to all of these creatures. And it does some really cool things with some of these, like this these crystal assemblers, which can form like fucking Devastator from Transformers into a crystal gestalt that includes the different abilities of all the different crystal assemblers. So normally they would have a single crystal that they can, use different attacks from. This is something I've seen that designers use several. I should designer. These are several. This team is composed of like half a dozen different people who are actually submitting all these monsters. So I'm using the term designer as the royal designers. There's multiples. But I've seen this used in several of throughout this book are the concept of creatures that have different abilities, but each single creature might have access to only one of those abilities. It's think of the beholder, right? The beholder is such a fun stat block. It's got the 8 eye stalks. They all do different things. Now think of what if you fought a bunch of little creatures and each one had like one eye stalk that could fire one of the beholder things, but then when they swarm together, suddenly now you, the DM, have multiples of these abilities put together. And I see this being used several times throughout. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm saying it's a great thing. That's such a cool idea. Again, the beholder's a great monster, and it should be used as a template for more exciting, interesting monsters, because even you, the DM, might not necessarily know what's coming next. So there's some really fun ideas with that, including this crystal gestalt. There's some acidic death snails in here. There's creepy, alluring deep sirens. This deep sleeper is a really fucking scary looking, creepy idea. This like cloth thing it wears in its lower half is actually like a bunch of tentacle and hands put together, and they can actually detach and form their own what they called slithering clots, and that's how it creates this swarm. And that's another concept that it talks about earlier in those first 15 pages is you can have it's not the creature itself that swarms, but the creature acts as the hive, maybe a sentient walking hive that then the swarm emerges out of, and it takes this concept into all these different creature styles. Really, really cool ideas that you can use by detaching certain like body parts or something, and then all of a sudden those parts can then turn into swarms, and things get really pretty crazy. Although as crazy, complicated as that can be, I actually think 5e the swarms serve it pretty well, because then it reins in that complexity a bit, because instead of running 4 different creatures, suddenly you're just running from the DM standpoint, you're just running one creature, and all you have to do is keep track of whether it's doing its full attack or not, because the big thing about the swarm is it does get majorly debuffed if they have fewer than half of its hit points. There's these Ember Lynx, which are these fiery fiend cats with like spider eyes that are super creepy. This Fell Hive is also a good example of something that's literally a hive creature that shoots out other little creatures, and then those little creatures can then swarm. In this case, spectral insects. I believe it's a Shadowfell Hive that become multiple things. The Gem Skulls is probably one of my favorites, and this is definitely what I was talking about when it comes to the Beholder idea, where each skull has a certain crystal, and these crystals can all do different things, very similar to a Beholder, although in this case it's way easier to run. It's just, hey, you have to roll a certain save, or it's take your pick from any of the poisoned or stunned or paralyzed or restrained, like all the different conditions that can apply to you. And they can only ever do one because they typically only have one gem skull, although there is a variant later where it says, hey, you could have you've got 2 eyes, so why not use two gems in their skull? Or you can have them swarm together and create a swarm of gem skulls, in which case you can use multiples of these. Also, every single one of these monsters includes combat and tactics, which is pretty helpful. And sometimes there's not much going on. If it's just a creature with a basic bite, then it's just going to want to bite you. But it may include like some of its temperament, as well as what it prioritizes with its attacks. Almost like this is telling you if how the AI would run it if it didn't have much of a if it was just trying to run it based on the stat block alone. And then also a bunch of kind of fun adventure hooks that you could use. And this is something I believe I've seen from previous Splinterverse Media releases when they do any kind of monster book bestiary things, which is an awesome idea, because that gives me an idea as a DM of how to best use these creatures in all different ways. And I think they do a really good job of actually playing up, like sometimes maybe you're working for the creature, sometimes maybe you're trying to rescue or capture this creature, other times you're just trying to kill the creature. It's not just, all of them aren't just variations of killing the creature, which I think is a cool idea. In this case, it might be you're hired by this cult to collect the gemstones. Other ones are you're treating like a murder mystery, and you're wondering why people are being frightened to death. Well, it's somebody who's using a skull with that certain frightening gemstone to take people out. Another one is you're trying to come up with um, to work security at an event that's got gem skulls there that are being used by this certain cult. There's a little sidebar for this cult that it kind of expands the lore behind these gem skulls. I think these are some really cool ideas in all these adventure hooks. I've read a couple of them, skimmed through a lot of them, and none of them did I look at and said, oh, that's stupid, right? Like, they're all actually pretty cool ideas, and a lot of them are like, okay, yeah, I can see how to use these particular creatures. And I'm just skimming through, by the way, because there are over 70 of these, and the whole book is like 180 pages. So it would be impossible for me to go boom, boom, boom on every single one of these. Instead, I'm going to point out kind of what I think are the more interesting ones and the ones that really like stood out to me. The Hydropede is obviously a centipede. It's still tiny, even though the artwork makes it look kind of big. But it actually operates kind of similar to an ooze, where it splits itself. Once it's become a swarm, it can split into multiple forms, and it comes with a regenerate, which means it's a goddamn ooze from Gloomhaven, and fuck that. As a player, obviously as a DM, that's just delightful. But you create a creature that when you attack it, it splits, and then every turn it regenerates. Holy shit, you could have a real problem on your hands now if this thing gets out of hand. And I get nightmares about Gloomhaven fighting the oozes in Gloomhaven, which is exactly how they work, because that's terrifying. The Lost Books, probably my favorite because it's such a fun concept. I think we've even seen swarms of books in at least in some context in at least one of the official 5e books, but this one really goes so far beyond what I was expecting, which it gives a D20 list of different, I guess, genres the books could be in. And then that genre gives it its unique signature attack, and it's called its magical contents. So, for like travel, it could like teleport somebody, for example. Religion, I think it's just a beam of radiant light, but that kind of concept where it's like depending on what the book is, and you could have a lot of fun with that as a DM, and it even gives you a bunch of sample like names for all the books, which is pretty cute. And then of course if they're just the one lost book, they're just the one book, right? They only have one of these abilities. You could roll it ahead of time, but it can only ever use the one. But now if you've got a swarm of lost books, now you can use multiples, which is again what I was talking about, how it uses that kind of beholder logic of playing around with different unique traits and being able to use more of them, and essentially things can become beholders. Also a fun one. It's a lot of really fun adventure hooks. It's entire demiplane. Not all of them obviously get the amount of love that the Lost Books have. There's only a very few of them that include kind of an expanded lore based on the creature. A few of them, for example, might have layer actions or legendary actions, but that's not usually the regular. Usually we just get kind of the one creature and then maybe either a swarming version of that creature, or it releases a minion tiny creature that then can swarm into something a little bit bigger. For an example, we're going to skip over to the Patchwork Seahorse, which is a giant, kind of stupid looking seahorse, if I'm being honest. But this is the boss seahorse because it can spawn as an action a bunch of minion seahorses, of which there are 3 different stat blocks for, and each of those minion seahorses can then multiply and swarm into a bigger swarm stat block. And then it even says, hey, if you want to use additional seahorses, here's maybe some more ideas for additional seahorse fun. Not something I was expecting for a somewhat, tier 1, pretty challenging boss fight with poison growl, bubble trap, which I think all the others can bubble trap as well. Absolute pain in the ass with all their different abilities they have, which, hey, give me D&D 5e creatures specifically with interesting abilities that aren't just trading blows back and forth with each other with bigger and bigger numbers. I think that gets kind of old fast, and I appreciate especially older versions of D&D were better about this. Pathfinder's better about this. I think 5e, at least in the base game, is not great about it, which is giving me interesting monsters to fight from an actual mechanical point of view. And so far, when I'm looking at all these creatures, they do some pretty cool stuff without necessarily being super over complicated to run or really upsetting the balance too much. Page 133, we've got the Resembler Lizard. This is like a creepy, doppelganger. It's not quite like the Thing or something like that, but it's these lizards. They can bite you, and if you die from their poison, then they can assemble as a team of 6, I think, and they kind of do this like orgy thing, I think, and then they can form into a copy of that person, and in this they take over that person's life, which you can imagine some adventure hooks are pretty much all about that. But then if you and then they take over that stat block and they become that stat block. But then if you do a bunch of things like see reduces to half its hit points, or it spends more than 1 hour outside of the material plane once to revert to its original form. Mainly if you reduce it to have its original hit points, all of a sudden it splits into like 6 different lizards, into its original forms, basically. A really creepy, weird ass idea for a creature that's just a lizard that can meld with others to create a person that it's recently killed. That was absolutely bananas to me. We've got these little elemental strandlings, which are like tiny motes of elemental energy that can either appear as individual, air elemental, or air strandling, earth strandling, or swarms of their own little versions, or you can create a conflicts of strandlings where you've got all their different abilities depending on, either you can roll it randomly or choose one of those. Another cool idea I thought was the Unihorns, which is actually a creature that is infected by some kind of nasty fungal disease that creates this giant kind of unicorn-like horn. It only spreads to quadrupedal beasts, but it kills them after like a week. Or if they die before then they explode into this like shower of spores, and then that's how it keeps spreading. And so you can take this idea and basically turn any beast into this infected unicorn creature, and they basically they have their own little traits about the horn. They have their explosive spore thing, and then all their attacks suddenly do necrotic damage instead of normal damage. So kind of a cool idea for a story concept there, I guess. At the end, in other words, it's an insidious infection that doesn't look like an insidious infection, right? It almost looks like just a fey creature or like a unique thing, rather than being you'd expect to see like some nasty spore growths or something. So I thought that was just a really cool idea. So really, throughout the book, I was very impressed with the ideas here, and I haven't even really talked too much about the swarming stuff, right? Like the swarm concept is there. Every single one of these creatures can swarm. Some of them, it's the basic creature that summons a swarm. Others, they are, like a little insect creature, but maybe they'd be unique in some way. It's like a little spider that can reflect, damaging spells back at the attacker or something. And others, it's a creature that when it swarms, it suddenly becomes something else, a different creature, or just a much more advanced stat block. This void mouth is such a cool idea, where its mouth is a portal into a different realm, into a demi-plane, and it can either, obviously swallow you up in there and stick you in there, or it can spit out whatever creatures it's got in there, or it can just regurgitate, acid or some other kinds of abilities. But it's just it doesn't have any real thinking process of its own. But then when it merges with others of its kind, it becomes this void merge and suddenly has all these other crazy abilities and things that it can gain, and becomes this giant 300 hit point CR12 absolute monstrosity. So another one that got a lot of love because it got its own demi-plane from it. But it really goes hard, I guess, with the multiverse angle, almost more than the swarm angle. But I appreciate that because we got all these swarm rules. Every single one of these creatures does have something to do with swarms or can swarm, even though one of them was literally this like root behemoth. I didn't write down the page number of that one, unfortunately. That is literally already gargantuan. And I was like, how do you swarm? And I was like, oh, well, I guess this is one right here. The base stat block is already gargantuan elemental CR20. So there's a barrage of root behemoths, which is still gargantuan because we really can't go bigger than that. And then it's CR30, which is just this huge force of these giant, I don't know, mountain-sized creatures. Like, it seems absolutely crazy to me that could be a swarm. But I guess when you think about it, if you try hard enough, anything can swarm. All right, let's go over my pros and cons for Swarms of the Multiverse. Pro, over 70 new creatures, each with artwork, multiple stat blocks, swarm versions, combat tactics, and adventure hooks. My goodness, I love the way this monster book is organized and gives me all of the really helpful information for me as a DM, which is, give me some basic stuff about what is the point of this creature, where's it came from, what's it doing, obviously give me that stuff, but also adventure hooks, which give me awesome ideas on how to actually deploy this creature and use it in the context of the story. Combat and tactics, which is really how to deploy the creature when it comes to actually running it, in combat. And then having all these different stat blocks means it gives me a lot more opportunities to have creatures that automatically become more interesting because they can either swarm together or they can spawn these other swarms that can create these just interesting dynamics. And then they all have artwork. By the way, the entire thing is another pro, is professionally designed with a ton of artwork all around it. And I've really come to appreciate this from Splinterverse Media. All their products look really great. They look like, absolutely professional, tabletop RPG books. I don't know if this is all original artwork. I don't think it is. I don't know and how much what the ratio is of that, but I love this art, and it all looks fantastic, and I think that's something you really need from a monster book too, is to help give me that visualization. Pro, there's an appendix at the end, by the way, that I haven't gotten to, which helpfully organizes each creature by environment, by type, and even by plane. This is something I do kind of try to expect from my monster books, but I'm still appreciative of when they're included, because that really helps me. Obviously, you're going to list them alphabetically at first. I don't know if they're listed by... Oh, there they are, by challenge rating. There we go. So that's all the ones I want. That does it. Everything is there that I could want from the appendix. That gives me all that information. I guess there's no... There we go. That's the page. Okay, page numbers are there too. Stat block index. All right, there we go. That's all the information. Pro, we also get VTT tokens for all. So every time you see any one of these creatures, even I think these tiny seahorses, you get a VTT token for it, which is fantastic. Now, I will say, the virtual tabletop tokens are just white background with like a gray token. So it's kind of not the best token, but I hate to even complain about it, because the fact that we're given VTT tokens, I think, is just awesome and a huge thumbs up. So I'm going to include it as a pro for sure, that's there. If I was really serious about using like one or two of them, I might make my own token, because I think I could do it a little bit better. But if I want to just have all these available in a virtual tabletop, then having that option is a huge plus. And pro, this whole swarm creation chapter is fantastic. It's easy to use rules for making your own swarms of existing creatures, which you've got all this available. But then once you actually look through this book, I don't know if you would need to use too many of these rules, because the new swarms that are here are just really, really great. They are, with the one caveat that they do tend to go into the like very creepy eldritch, far realm kind of themes. Cons, I really don't have any. Like maybe some nitpicks here and there, but honestly, the biggest probably shocker is that I just wasn't. I think it just defied my expectations for me, thinking this was just going to be a bunch of swarms, like this picture basically, where it has like a lot of little creatures that are swarming. I was like, okay, that's going to be nice. That's a swarm book. But in fact, it actually does much more than that, so none of that is a con. In fact, my final verdict is far more than just a book of swarming monsters. Swarms the Multiverse is also a repository of ghastly, creepy, and delightfully eldritch creatures to throw at your players. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can watch more reviews and follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. And you can support my work at patreon.com/Rogue Watson. Shouts to my platinum patrons: Joe, Will, Thomas, Stan, Brennan, Genocider, David, Eclectic, Roleplay Roll, Christopher, Brian, Corey, Coa 1337, Big Nut, John F, John L, Scott, Eric, Tyler, Nathan, Camp, Crystal Lake, Counselor, Andrew C, Daryl, the Reldron, Captain Woody 79, Jason, RJ, Stephanie, Andrew H, B01135809, and Patrick R. And gold patrons: RPG Paper Crafts, Pretty Boy, and Yuma, Desert Lounge, Sam, Lippy Bones, Jerome, Nathan, Faz, Torta, Scott, Refus, Carolyn, William, Jerry, Thomas, and Prophet. Thank you all very much for your support.